Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here for another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show that I'm doing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons that's going on this year. Lots of interesting things happening. Wizards of the Coast has started to announce some new projects and events and stuff like that. But all year long, I'm going to be doing this show as I go through the history of Dungeons and Dragons, doing cartoon homages to one piece of classic D&D art from each year that the game has been around. While I'm doing that, I'm inviting some of my, mostly my friends, but all kinds of people. They're my friends because I've been doing this for a long time. Met a lot of people uh, who have worked on the game and have history with it to talk about various aspects of Dungeons and Dragons. Um, Today we have a guest we had previously. Stephen D. Sullivan is back again. As you may remember, the last time he was here, we got through an hour and had plenty left to talk about. So I said I was going to bring him back. The reason I'm doing it right now is because of the topic I want to talk about today. Hello, Linnea. It's glad that you could make it. I will say before we get started that today has been a very strange technology day for me. There's been a lot of ups and downs. As Steve and I were getting ready for the show, we had some more little hiccups. So who knows what's going to happen? Except I do know that the conversation is going to be fun and lively. So without any further ado or preamble, I'm just going to pull in Steve here to join us. Hello, Mr. Sullivan. How are you doing?
Hey Stan, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You know, technology notwithstanding.
Right. Well, and I'm coming off 10, 12, 14 days, whatever it's
Right.
been, of Founders and Legends Con, followed by, which is to celebrate the 50th anniversary of D&D,
Right.
followed by Gary Con, which is a tradition every year, and then sadly Jim Ward's funeral on
Yes.
Monday.
Yes.
So it's been kind of a wacky 10, 12 days, whatever it's been.
Yeah. When I was doing this last week, it was just after within a day or two of Jim passing, so we mentioned that briefly. And I know I wasn't able to go to Gary Con, but I know a bunch of the old folks like us were there, and everyone got
Yeah,
to.
there was a lot of the crew there, and then there were even some more of the crew that I didn't manage to catch at the cons at the funeral. So that's been the good part of all of
Right.
this is seeing old friends, seeing Steve Winter and Jeff Grubb and Mike Pondsmith and a lot of other people from my days when I was on staff and heavily into the gaming industry is before I became a reclusive writer of stuff.
So before we get going, why don't you, in case people have not watched your first episode, just give us a quick, who is this Sullivan guy?
So my name is Stephen D. Sullivan. Sometimes I'm known as Steve Sullivan, and I started working professionally on Dungeons and Dragons in 1980 when I was one of the editors on the Basic and Expert set that they now call Mold Cook. And then I moved into the graphic arts department and worked on many maps for a number of years, and was eventually rejoined in the mapping department by Diesel and Dave Sutherland. And then I left TSR with the Rebels to form Pacesetter, and that went on for 2 years. And we produced Chill and Time Master, Star Race, lots of other things. And then I became a freelancer when the Pacesetter, which was undercapitalized, went under, and came back and did freelance mapping and other stuff for TSR. I did the maps for the War of the Twins, I think the second Dragonlance series was, and lots of games and Iron Crown stuff and hero games and all sorts of things. Wrote a comic series called The Twilight Empire Robinson's War that ran in Dragon Magazine for 50 issues. I did a bunch of comics, prominently among them the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then eventually I became a novelist and wrote a whole bunch of boy detective books and adaptations of various things, which also included the first Iron Man movie for kids. and I've been kind of writing novels, mostly novels ever since. Though lately, I've occasionally been doing some comics work for special projects, and I do maps on occasion still. And so my whole career has just been kind of a ball of all of that stuff.
It sounds very familiar to me. I'm
Yeah,
sitting
it's
here
the life
listening,
of a freelancer.
sitting here listening to you do that. It's like I got to start a second podcast so we can talk about all that other stuff.
Well, if you do, I'll be there for you.
Um, all right, so today uh, the year that we're talking about, or the year that is the focus for my drawing today, is 1981 or 82. 82.
82.
Um, and I was looking at what came out in '82, and there are a bunch of good products. There was the Lost City, Pharaoh, Lost Caverns,
Right?
so, Sojkanth. I could never say that.
Sajkant.
Sojkanth,
Sajkant.
Castle
Sajkant.
Amber, and there
Right.
are
I
there
think I
are.
worked on all of those.
I don't doubt it. Right? That's a time when everyone had their fingers in everything.
Right. Well, and as the graphic artist mapper guy around then, I
Right,
had my fingers
right.
in almost everything. There was like a year and a half, maybe. It was somewhere between 1 and 2 years where where there were no other mappers. So I literally worked on everything TSR put out except Dragon Magazine. Um, and
So
that may have been that period.
what? But I mean, of the years, that '82 is a year with the lightest schedule. In starting in '80, there seemed to have been 12 or more products, uh, but in '82 there were only these 9, and they were adventures,
Huh. That's
which
intriguing.
is a little strange. Um,
It
but you
was, however, when we were starting to, I think Jeff Grubb and Tracy Hickman were on staff by that point. Yeah, because Tracy did Pharaoh, which he brought in. Um, I think he'd done some work on that before he came to TSR, and he brought it in kind of with him. Uh, he and his wife had worked on that, and the Pharaoh series. There were three of them. I think he had that concept, and starting around then, when he was starting to get into the company, I think we started thinking about Dragonlance somewhere in that area.
Yeah, well,
We were also
Dragonlance is gonna.
doing computer games at that
Right.
time.
And were you
So
guys
there were
involved in the computer games too?
Yeah, I was actually the staff graphic artist for the computer games. So I did all the on-screen art that appears in those games. Some of it was adapted from existing art. The Dawn Patrol cover by Jim Holloway and what was the other, the dungeon cover that we had, and some of the dungeon art from the game. And but some of it, like the Theseus and the Minotaur stuff, was all made up from whole cloth. And then Larry painted the cover to that one. Yeah, so I was involved in that. That's one of the glorious moments of TSR, and also one of the most ignominious moments. So, shall
Those
I tell you
those
the end of the? Do you know the story of the end of the computer games department?
no, no, but this sounds good.
So TSR had, I think, four of us working there. There was me, there was Bruce Nesmith, and there was Keith Engie. Mikey Price was like in charge of that little division within the division of the creative department. We had one room on the second floor above the Dungeon Hobby Shop that was toward toward the street corner from where the artists were. So it was like right at the end of the art department. I was in the art department, and I used to bop from my office, which was I was sharing with Larry Elmore at the time, around the corner to do this. And I was like part time working for them. And we were doing these really interesting computer games. We managed to release three of them, uh, and TSR had trouble with customer service for them because
Mhm.
they're computer games. So people would call them up and say, "My game doesn't work. What am I doing wrong?"
Right.
Usually that would make its way to the department, and then work in the department would stop while Bruce or Keith described to them what they needed to do with their computer to get the game to work. Sometimes that happened, sometimes it didn't. Anyway, um, so it was a bit of a customer service nightmare. TSR wasn't really set up very well to do computer games. Just replicating the discs was a pain in the butt, as I recall. But it was exciting, and we were kind of moving forward, and we were on the cutting edge of doing
I mean,
computer
again,
games at
this
the
is
time.
computer games in 1981, 82.
Yeah, 81 and 82, right? Exactly. Um, and there came a point where when we moved into the other building, they decided they wanted to consolidate all of the creative divisions. They moved us into the other building, this kind of big windowless space above the warehouse at the time. It didn't even have glass blocks, so you could get any light in at that time, and stuck the computer games in another small corner of the warehouse building in a darkened room, which was good for the computer games. And we were working very diligently on the next set of computer games and talking with designers like Mark Akers about how we were going to expand from where we were and make things that were more like the Dungeons and Dragons game. And Mark Akers had an interesting notion that was like a story web thing where if you pulled on this web, it would change things elsewhere. A lot of what you now would think of computer games are being like. So we were working on that. And TSR had gone through a fairly rapid expansion. There were fewer than 100 people when I got there, and I think we are up to 300, 350. But
Wow.
with that expansion had come a lot of, well, questionable decisions, like deciding to make toys in China and buying a needlework company that just happened to belong to a relative of the Blooms and things like that. So uh, money was starting to get tight,
Yeah.
and they were looking at the computer games department, and I guess in their point of view, there wasn't much going on there. And, there were half part-time me there, when I wasn't in the art department, and Bruce and Keith, and I don't remember if Mikey had left by then or not. And one day, someone, and to my, I understand why I blocked this out, but I don't remember who it was. It was probably either Kevin Bloom or Mike Cook. Came down to our little corner of the dungeon, our dark little corner of the dungeon, and told us that they were shutting down the computer game company portion of the company entirely from that moment on,
Wow.
uh, which which meant that Bruce Nesmith got to go to design. I got to go to back to graphic arts. Keith Engie, who was a genius programmer, his first computer, he soldered the language onto a board so he made the computer from the ground up, literally soldering the language onto the boards without any way to know whether it worked until he was done, right? So he was really good at his job. um, they came in and they told us they were shutting it down, and I remember being baffled. Maybe Bruce and Keith were less baffled. And I said, why are you shutting us down? We're just on the verge of kind of this breakthrough based on the stuff we were doing before. And the executive, that I don't remember who it was, said, and I quote, "There will never be any money in computer games,"
Oh, wow.
end quote. Now, clearly that was true, right?
Yeah. There's a man with vision.
No money in computer games at all. Now, of course, one of the great ironies of that is not only has that proved to be incredibly short sighted and completely wrong, but Bruce Nesmith then went on to head a little project called Skyrim. So who knows? If there had been any money in computer games, we
they
might have had
there they
Skyrim in 1986.
you never know. They still might make it. Computer games.
They might.
Might
They
not.
might. Computers might become important in our society. It's possible. I know it sounds like science fiction, but maybe. Anyway, so that's the story of the TSR's computer game department.
Wow. So many things.
Yeah, I know.
Every
I
time
know.
I know the story, I find out there's a lot of the story I don't know. So
Yeah.
so I was looking at what was going on in this time, and I realized that although none of those nine adventures, all of which are good, nothing against them, beautiful art of them, and I was like, okay, I can find something to work with in here. And then it struck me the other thing that happened in these years was the cartoon ads, the comic book ads, which were huge for me and a lot of other people I've talked to.
A lot
And
of
I
people.
know that in the last couple of years, I found out how deeply involved you were with those. So that's what I want to do my homage to, and that's what I want to talk to. That's for those just tuning in. That's why I
Right.
brought you back so quickly for another show because you are the person that knows the the ins and outs and was there and was involved in doing these.
Right. Yeah. I wrote all of the Marvel Comics Dungeons and Dragons ads except the very first one.
So I'm going to switch views here and just let I know you know everything. Let me do the vamp intro. Then you can tell everyone how I'm wrong, and we can get into the deep part of the story.
Absolutely.
But
It was only in the last year or so that I discovered how much kind of mythology had built up
yeah,
around this because, it was something I did and enjoyed, but I had no idea there was actually a
there's
fan
so
base
yeah.
for it.
It was one of those weird things. So I was a comic book reader at the time. I was playing D&D and getting involved in what would eventually become my career. But in Marvel Comics, there appeared this ad, which was a comic story ad for D&D. Now, up till then, and I suppose at the same time, TSR was also doing these very slick ads, photographed by ad agencies and kids sitting around a table wearing clean shirts and uh, that were fine, but they certainly didn't speak to me. I saw this and I was like, "This is great. This is like D&D." And then
Right.
I think it was I don't know whether it was the following month or one of the next few months. It switched, came back with better art and a story that which got D&D even more. And over the course of a year or so, probably a little longer, because I know there were some months when there weren't these
Yeah,
ads.
there were some breaks. I don't remember exactly how the schedule
Uh,
worked, but there were
there
definitely
were
breaks in the ad schedule.
it wound up telling the story about these characters in little ad, one page at a time as an ad within that ran in Marvel Comics. These are scanned out of comics from my collection. Steve, was you were telling me you've done some rework and cleaning up of them,
Yeah,
and
I've done some restoration of them, and most of them look pretty good. That particular one you've got now, I'm not entirely crazy about my
yeah.
restoration on, so I may take another go at it. We'll see.
So I'm just kind of quickly going through. These are the ones that ran in that series, and everyone I've talked to at the time, all of my friends, even the ones who weren't playing D&D, noticed these ads, and everyone knew about them, and we would actually talk about them. Anyone that was playing D&D, we definitely were talking about them. And as I got into, and then it just ended on this cliffhanger.
Right.
Going to fly into a castle. What will happen? What could the quest end? Lie here? Maybe we'll never know. But these things
It's
for
worth mentioning that Bill Willingham, who drew most of these, also was doing a an unrelated but parallel ad series in Epic
in Epic
Illustrated.
Illustrated, yes, he was. In fact, and this is the
Bill
one.
thinks Bill thinks I may have helped him on the first couple of these, but it doesn't really look like my writing and stuff. So
No,
I think he was taking all the glory for himself. And
these
it's the amazing thing is you look at these and you can really see again these were running around the same time as the other ones you just showed. You can really start to see Bill's art comic book art style develop.
yeah,
And in the last three of the ones that I worked on, especially, and the last couple of these, I mean, this really starts to look like, boy,
yeah,
these are
like
starting to look really slick and really, those of you that follows Bill's work can really see. his work. And this last one that he did,
Yeah.
I think, is just fabulous looking. Yeah, I love that.
So
And that's the
for those who don't
and that's the cliffhanger end of that.
right for those who don't know, uh, don't recognize the name Bill Willingham off the top of their heads, they would know him most recently, most famously from Fables as the creator of
Right.
Fables. But
Yep.
he's been doing the writing on that. He was also a cartoonist, as we see, of Graph,
Right.
who did
Yeah, and
several.
he did issues of the Justice League, and just oh, just a ton of other comics. But I remember Justice League because he was crashing at my house that time, and I was doing doing backgrounds for him. And you know, I was working in my studio upstairs. He was working downstairs, and
Purple World.
so yeah, yeah. There's all sorts of cool stuff in these, and this reflected you know, whether it was me and Bill and Jeff D, or just Bill on mostly on his own, just reflected our love for the game and our attempt to make the game exciting and
Right.
interesting and get people to buy the game. Our theory was if we made the ads like the game, people would want to play the game, and that seems to have worked spectacularly.
Yeah. Yeah. As I said, everyone I knew at the time was talking about this. Everyone I know who got into the gaming professionally in the next few years after this remembered these. And I was describing these to someone else and comparing them to the other ads that were going on, the ones that were produced by the the ad, the regular ad.
the ad
Yeah,
the ad agency,
yeah.
yeah.
That those ads were for the parents. Those were for the people who were going to buy it for them as a gift. These were the ads that were for the people that were going to play it. Really, they were the
Yep.
in the day the equivalent of the live streams that we had, the video live streams of gaming, right?
Yes.
In the manner that they kind of showed you what the game was about.
Right. Right, and that's what Bill and Jeff on that first one after the second ad after the
Yeah,
first ad after this one, the first I worked on this ad,
yeah,
the ad with the sword getting eaten and Indel falling through the trap door and all of that kind of stuff. That was our aim and our goal was to make it exciting and make it like like a game experience, the way
right,
you felt playing the game, the kind of things that might happen to you in the game. People have asked me online and in person whether we were following a certain game's set rule set or if this was set in a particular world, and I've said it's set in Steve Bill Jeff world. And we weren't following the rules entirely. We were trying to give an impression of the rules and what it
right,
was like to play the game. So we're not as you know concentrating on well what level are these characters and what are their hit points and what spells has Grimslade memorized and that
right,
kind of stuff and what class is the elf and that kind of stuff. We're just trying to make it a as cool a reading experience as it could be so people would cut out that coupon, send it in, and get the game info.
right. Yeah, this we see so much space is taken up by this, and every one the wordy, 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 wordy. Send this in.
Right, exactly. And if you go back to the first one that came out, you'll and the first one that we did, you'll see that the ad occupies a small corner in the bottom right
Yeah, it's
hand
basically one panel.
portion of the page. Right, it's basically one panel large.
Then it becomes
It was so successful
a quarter
that
of the
they decided they needed to draw more attention to it. And so then it immediately took up another another
it's
panel of
about a
the
quarter of the
story.
page in
Yeah.
these from
And
then on.
so we were so successful, we immediately lost space to do the art and story in,
Oh, it's a
which was,
man. If that isn't a fitting story, anyway.
and if you look, if you go to
Before
the
we go
last,
on,
Okay,
Okay.
all right, all right.
I said because I want to get drawing, otherwise I'm going to get nothing done in this.
Oh yeah,
And
you're right.
so I I'm going to say I had a heck of a time trying to figure out what to draw, not because well because it's good story, but there aren't a lot of panels that are capture the whole thing, right? I thought here my first thought was to go back as you say, and I'm going to want you to explain this in a minute why the first one is so different. It is very different, everything about it.
Yes.
And I thought, well, maybe I'll redo this scene with the shambling mound, but put Bill's designed characters in there. And I noodled around with that a little, and it just didn't look like an homage. It looked like me doing fan art, which there's nothing wrong with. I just didn't think that was.
Right.
So I started thinking about my absolute favorite panel in this entire series. Well, the second one, second most
Is
favorite
that one.
is that one, but my most favorite one is this one
Right.
because, as you will explain later, you couldn't have fighting, so they come up
Right.
against a dragon, and what do? The dragon has to stop and say, "Oh, stay your hand, warrior. You may
Hey man,
go." And
this
I
is
just
all a big misunderstanding.
I love this panel. So I'm gonna do an homage to this panel and add a little bit of extra background and a couple extra characters. So that's what I'm
Right.
gonna do. Hmm?
If for some reason people are listening to this and not actually looking at it as this is going on, what we have here is we have a Valerius with his magic sword in one side of the panel, and the red dragon looking at him with a very sheepish Bill Willingham wonderful dragon face on the other side. And they're about to fight, and the dragon says, "The great sword, Narl, stay your hand, warrior. You and your friends may leave in peace."
And I'll say
And that is
that's how it sounds to you. Reading it, I always heard it as, "Oh, the great sword now. Stay your hand, warrior. You and your friends may live in peace. Leave in peace." I also thought it
Bill may have. That sounds very much like Bill may have done it. Yes.
okay.
Whoa! Oh! The
Oh,
great sword, Narl. Stay your hand, warrior. You and
I
your
also
friends may
figured
leave in peace.
I also figured it was probably just that the dragon just didn't want to have a fight. So he's like, "Oh, look, you've got the sport. Yeah, here, take some gold and go away."
But they can't take the gold. See, that's the thing. He never says take the treasure
Right,
because one of the strictures we were under was that you couldn't have violence, real violence, meaning people actually hurting
right.
each other, and you couldn't actually take treasure because that was
That's
stealing or
stealing.
looting, and we did not want to encourage the management did not want to encourage that in the game or think we were encouraging people to do those things.
I mean,
That
believe
stricture came up after we started the series,
right. It's hard to
for
believe
what it's worth.
that "Stay Your Hand, Warrior" is the same one that says "Greetings, mortal
Mortar worm. And
worm."
yeah, and Indul's going, oh my, I think I may be in trouble.
All right, so that's what I'm gonna use for my for my drawing. So I'm gonna
It's too bad you can't have a little panel with the comics up in this while you draw too, but I know where
well, as it
space is at a
turns out,
premium.
if I get myself set here, I can come back, and I do.
Oh, look at that. So we do have some of it anyway. And that may
I
be
can zoom it down, but then it's really not as much good for me as a reference.
right. Yeah, no, to do whatever you need to draw.
All right, so
So yeah, I love that. I love that panel too.
let's go back and start with the first comic that looks nothing like the rest of the series.
Right.
Ha- Walk us into how this whole thing got going.
So at some point, I will be doing a series on my website about this whole series, but without going back and looking in great detail at all my notes. Basically, what happened was TSR was looking to branch out their market, and they decided that wisely that comic readers might be the same kind of people that were playing their games, which I think you and I are dead proof of, right,
Yeah,
Stan?
I should think so.
And that being the case, they also figured out that the best way to get attention of those readers would be to do what I believe was then the largest ad buy they'd ever done, and buy a series of one-page ads in Marvel Comics. Which, if you look at the progression of them, the last one in this first series, the reason that looks better than all the other ones is it was actually on the back cover of the comics. Now, as a weird
This one
collector,
also was. That's why the color is solid. There were
right?
some
That's the one I mean. That one there was the last. It was the last page of the first story, and
right.
that's why it looks so great. Because not only had Bill become a better artist at that point, but it was also done on the glossy paper. So when everyone was scanning their comics, that one looks just fab, and the others don't. So they decided they were doing this ad buy, and it was a big ad buy. I mean, a full page ad in Marvel Comics. I don't know what it cost, but it was in relative terms to what TSR had been doing. It was a big chunk of money, and so they did what they would usually have done with any kind of ad buy, and that was they contacted one of the studios that they were working with on advertising down in Chicago. Now, this may have been the only studio they were using. I'm not sure, uh, and I I'd have to go and research to see if there were others, but I know for certain that they were using Ray Sione's studio, which I think was just called Sione Studio, and that I'd have
Mhm.
to look up too, which was down in Chicago. And Gary came from Chicago, and Dave Dimery, who was one of the higher ups in the company and was in charge of the advertising department, he came from Chicago, and I believe, though sadly, obviously, Gary is gone and Dave is gone, that they had prior acquaintance. Dave at least had prior acquaintance with Ray Cioni in his studio. In fact, TSR had been using them for other things. Among other things that they did was that they did animations. So I don't know if you remember any of the ads for TSR that eventually ran on
Yes.
TV that had animations. They did those ads. They also created Morley the Wizard, who was TSR's VIP. They called it a VIP, and I don't remember what it stood for off the top of my head. It was like very important personality. It was supposed to be a brand character for the company, and that probably may have been a little later than this, but it was the same people that did those ads that did this ad. So as near as any of us can tell, probably Gary and Dave had the idea for this ad. They managed to convince the Bloom brothers and the rest of the management in the company it would be a good experiment to try this idea, even though it was quite a lot of money to get it into Marvel Comics. And they gave the assignment to Ray Sione's studio, where Ray worked with a number of other people, including a guy named Kurt Davis Miller, who had at one point did a dragon cover of a very ugly witch. And but they were professional advertising people down in Chicagoland that did a variety of advertising art and services. And as I said, I'm pretty sure TSR had used them before for other ads, uh, but never for something like this. We don't know exactly who wrote the first ad. It may have been a combination of Dave and Gary. It may have been them with Razione. In any case, they cooked up the ads uh, in Ray's studio, as near as any of us can tell, and using some names from characters that had appeared in, I think, a Monsters and Treasure or player. I'm sorry, a player characters
Right.
collection set.
The
So I
rogue,
think Grimslade and
the rogues gallery.
Grims, yeah, the Rogues Gallery. That's it. Yeah, yeah, and I think Grimslade and Valerius, not necessarily same characters, but the names I think came out of that for at least those two characters. I don't know where Indel came from. So I assume they went through the normal ad development process and had some sketches and ideas and tried to work in stuff that Gary or Dave Dimery told them about and produce that first ad. And obviously, it was a terrific idea, right? But none of us in the creative division at TSR knew about it. At that time, the headquarters of TSR was in the LRP building on Sheridan Springs Road. That is not the building that everyone thinks of as the TSR headquarters. That was actually their second headquarters on TSR on Sheridan Springs Road. The
Hmm.
original building is like a block down the street if you're going down the street and going to go off toward the next door pub. Right before there's like a little side street there. And they and it was the LRP building was called that because it was formerly occupied by LRP, which was probably one of America's foremost van conversion companies at the time. And they had occupied that building before they'd outgrown it. And what they did was, for those of you that don't know what a fan conversion is, it was very big at the end of the 70s and the early to mid 80s at least, to take a stock panel van from, Chevy or Ford or whoever, and then trick it out by, painting Iron Maiden logos on the side, or dragons and unicorns
Right.
or
It's so
all of that kind of stuff.
basically
Pull this
it's the cheesy 70s 80s van that everyone thinks of. The reason that that's a thing is this was a real thing that people did, that there were companies that made their living on it.
Right. Yeah. And these guys were at least nationwide famous. If you look them up, you can still find pictures of LRP vans. It's more than 40 years later now. And people talk about how great they were and, the leather bucket seats or whatever crazy stuff they were putting into them. And that was obviously, it was clearly a good job to have at the time if you were any good at it. And these guys were. Anyway, that building was the first headquarters of TSR that I was familiar with. We were all downtown above the Dungeon Hobby Shop. The Dragon magazine was in the little gray building in between the two locations at the Pizza Hut. So that's all by way of explanation that management and the creative division were, I don't know, what do you think it is, Stan? Is like a mile and a half apart, maybe 2 miles?
I think closer to two.
Yeah, it's far enough that you can't walk. You can't. Well, you could
You
because nothing in Lake
can't
Geneva
walk
is
there for
really that big.
you. You couldn't walk there to get to a meeting. It would take too long.
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly. You'd have to take a car. Um. So none of us had any idea that this ad buy was happening until those of us that were comic readers, which was a bunch of us, uh, including obviously Jeff and Bill and me, until it actually the comics showed up. And someone, my memory is hazy whether it was Lawrence Schick or Tom Mulvey, walked in with this Marvel comic and was like, "Hey, look at this terrible ad, or look at this D&D ad in the comics," and had kind of a laugh about it because it was like, "Hey, we didn't know anything about this. Look, check this out. This is kind of it's a little bit wacky, and it's like it's really cool, but couldn't they have done something that was
Right.
cooler?"
Right.
Was the
Yeah.
sentiment.
That's what I always got out of hearing you guys talk about it. Is wow, this is cool. Would have been really cool if they'd done it well.
Right, exactly. And that is not to criticize Ray Cioni or Kurt Davis Miller or Dave or Gary or anyone else that conceived that first ad, because it was a brilliant idea, and it was something that Gary, I know, was very much for. But the execution was crazy, and as has happened at other times in history, TSR's history, they've gone out of house for things that maybe they could have done better in house with the
Not
resources and
just
people that they
TSR.
had. Yeah, no, and that I'm sure that happens everywhere else, but this was TSR was kind of well, it was a first job for me, and it was probably a first job for Jeff and Bill. Certainly in the industry, though, Jeff had created villains and vigilantes by that point with Jack Herman, but it was like our first serious job. So when something like that happened, it was like not. oh, here it goes again. This always happens. It was like, oh, why is this happening? This is terrible. Why don't they just think? And there's various reasons why they don't just think. Um, yeah, so we saw this, and my memory is that the division I was in was on the third floor, which was the editorial division, along with the design and development. And the artists were down on the second floor. So this must have been in '81 when we started working on this, maybe. Because there was a big shakeup, and Jeff and Bill left the company, and I no longer remember how that happened. Viz this ad, but there was generally like, oh, kind of an oh, those wacky executives feeling up on the third floor where the creative division was. And the similar down in the art department were Jeff and Bill and Errol, and I think it was probably them and Rosloff at that point, maybe someone else I'm forgetting, maybe Diesel. And but Jeff, Bill, and I were like, why are they doing this? Don't they know that we can do comics? Don't they know that we have experience doing comics, at least to some extent? They should talk to us. And here's where the story diverges, and where I remember it slightly differently than Bill remembers. Bill remembers that it was Jeff D went down to the ad department and to read them the riot act and say, why did you do this? We could have done this in house and we could do it better. I remember all three of us going down to talk to them, and it may be that both those things are true. It may be that Jeff did an initial talk with them and set up the fact that the rest of us were going to go down and meet. But my memory is that we went down there and to meet with the ad department and talk about this ad series. And the ad department at the time was two very nice women named Gail and Dagmar, and that they were about our age, which we were all young. We were about 10 years younger, most of us, or at least Jeff, Bill, and I were, than the executives of the company. Um, but the advertising people were our age, so we went down kind of, fire and brimstone, whatever, and said, "Why are you doing this out of house? We could do this in house." Now, it's occurred to me over fairly recently that when we went down, it was kind of and we talked to them, and they gave us the job. They said, we convinced them we knew the game better than the people that were doing it. We could do the art as well or better than the people that were doing it, and keep it consistent with the game, and it would be better and more productive that way. Blah 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 blah. Did that, that gift the gab thing that some of us who are Irish have, and 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 Bill is also super charming, and at the time, all the women really liked Bill. So I think that Bill was involved with this probably really helped. We went down and they gave us the job. We said, we want this job. We can do this job as well or better than what you're getting. And they gave us the job. Looking back recently, as I've been talking about this and thinking about this, I'm almost dead certain that not only were they convinced that we could do the job, but they were probably convinced that we were going to do it for peanuts compared to an advertising agency in Chicago. That
Probably.
hadn't occurred to me for many years, but uh, I'm betting. I'm betting that may have played into it. I haven't asked Gail or Dagmar, who I'm still in touch with, whether that was the case, but maybe at some point I'll remember and do that. So they gave us the ads, and my memory is that I may have done kind of a full script. We told them what we were going to do. We almost certainly showed them sketches. It wasn't quite Marvel style, and it wasn't quite full script, probably, because at that point, I'd only done my own comics in college, my college newspaper, and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And Jeff and Bill, I don't think had any professional comics experience, though Jeff had obviously done Villains and Vigilantes. But Jeff had gone to the Kubert School, the Joe Kubert School in New Jersey.
Right.
I think maybe for only 1 year. I'm not sure. You'd have to actually track Jeff down and ask him how long it was
Well,
there.
we'll
But my
probably get
memory,
Jeff as a guest, so I'll get that from him when he comes on.
awesome, and he'll say, "No, God, I never went to the Cooper School." But my memory is that he had been to the Cooper School, and thus he had he had the mad skills to make this work. So if you look at he did the layouts and the penciling for the first episode we did. He did the layouts, the penciling, the colors and the lettering.
Okay.
And if you look at all those elements of that first strip, you'll see that it's a big step up from what the ad agency in Chicago did, just from that standpoint. It's like his layouts are great, the characters, the anatomy of the characters is all really good. The colors are fabulous, and in fact, the colors wouldn't get this good again until that episode that you're drawing uh, your sketch from right
Right.
now. You're drawing. That was about when the colors got back toward where Jeff had them in that first episode. And so we did that first episode. The Looking at it, I I've made this joke many times before, but it's actually true that I got into D&D to to meet women because the sister of the dungeon master was really cute. So I started playing the game so I could go out with her, and that worked. And Stan knows my wife Kifley, who also started playing with that same dungeon master when he was in college. Um, and I had a couple of girlfriends in between that also gamed. So for me, playing D&D to meet girls actually was a spectacular success, right? And Kif and I have been together for 43 years now. Um, anyway, so I'd gotten into it for that reason, and thus I'd often played games and D&D games with women,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess that was not a huge thing at the time. I seem to remember that there were definitely women in the D&D class that I taught at MIT's high school studies program. Um, but also, like that first woman that I started playing the game to date, she had like entire little dungeons that she never really ran, I don't think, but they were all based on the New York City subway system and stuff, where she they had grown up in New York. So she had dungeons where the perils were that the toilets didn't work or they overflowed and this kind of crazy wonderful stuff. Um, in any case, looking at the party composition, there was a very obvious deficit there in that there were no women in the party, and we did not have a cleric either. So, based on those two facts, I decided that we should have a cleric, and I invented Sarin, who Jeff and Bill then designed and inserted into the strip with the famous "No questions now." Is
That
I
was
think what she
man,
says.
man. That goes along with the great there movies. You know what? I'm gonna go back to that so I could. There are movies like in Big Trouble in Little China. There's a part towards the end where they're running away and you don't know how they're going to get up. They look up and there's one of the characters, Egg Shen, a level above them. They look up and, how'd you get up there? And he says, wasn't easy. And the story goes on from there. Did
Right.
this,
Or the watermelon in Buckaroo Banzai where they're
yeah,
walking and says, "Why is there a watermelon there?"
yeah.
And Rai says, "I'll tell you later."
So here's what we had in the story where they're fighting the slime. They fight the slime. Indel's hurt, and all of a sudden, suddenly, a figure steps out from the shadows. Saren, no question now. How's Indel? And on goes the story. Brilliant,
Exactly.
brilliant.
I wish I could take complete credit for that. But in the give and take of making all this story that I devised with the other guys fit, I know I had a longer explanation of Saren showing up. It wasn't much longer, but it was definitely longer than no questions. It was like
Right.
I happened to be in the dungeon and I heard your cries or something like that. but Jeff was trying to fit all this story that we had into uh, a relatively small space, and I would never, as a professional comic writer who wrote Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and many other things now, I would never give an artist 9 panels to draw. Where in this kind of a situation, it's just too many by about 3 probably.
Yeah.
And so Jeff would, because he was doing the lettering, he would crunch things down, and maybe he asked me about it, or maybe he didn't. But the no questions now. It's a brilliant solution, and I have to give probably Jeff most of the credit for that, because it we don't have we don't need to answer that, and on we go, because it's more about the story than about how the hell she got there in the first
Right.
place. So yeah, so we introduced Siren, and we because of the design, deep dark secret, because of the designs in the first episode, we all kind of immediately decided that we would pick on Indel at every chance we got for the rest of the series. We were hired on, and if we did well, they had a 4 issue ad buy, including they may have upgraded that last one to the cover position, but they were committed to doing 4 of these ads, which is why it was so expensive and such a risk for them, and why I'm glad that the Gary and Dave Dimery had kind of fought to spend this money. So we introduced her, and the idea was it's a serial. So the idea was we could have done a completely different thing, but I think all of us felt that in some sense that we would be better off if it became one long continued story. And that would get people to look forward to the next one, then come back to the next one. And that meant we could keep what we liked from the first story and then just move it forward. So it was
Right.
a little recap, right, move the story forward, set up a cliffhanger. Classic. I've been
I
writing
say
serials
in the
ever
vein
since.
of the old movie serials.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's that's something I was very familiar with, and Jeff and Bill were too. So that was the plan. And it seems to have worked. So we did the first episode. We introduced a new character. Now we had 4 characters in our little party, and one of them became increasingly sexy as time went on, because Bill draws beautiful sexy women, and and also very competent. It's like you can be both beautiful and you can be super competent. So we introduced Siren, and then moved on and gave it to the art department, and they loved it. Or the art department, the advertising department, they loved it. They gave they sent me a full size photostat of the original artwork that I have to this day, with a little note pinned to it that says, "Thanks, Steve, Gail, and Dagmar." And I'm like, hey, we did good. And we did good enough that they decided, and again, probably partially because we'd done well, and also I'm guessing we were hundreds of dollars cheaper than the ad studio down
Almost
in
certainly.
Chicago. They decided that we should do it again. And at this point, and maybe even with the first ad, they started getting a lot of people cutting up their comic books and sending in that little coupon at the bottom of it. It turned out to be a gold mine for increasing what then would have been a physical mailing list for the
Right.
company. And it was just a nice combination of talent and good timing, and the great idea of using comic books, a comic in the comic, to advertise the game, which had a lot of comics sensibility in the way. Certainly, most people I knew that were playing it, there was a lot in common with D&D and Conan the Barbarian and other adventure comics that were very popular at the time. So that is how the first one came about, and it was so successful that they decided that next time they should tell people more about TSR and give us a little less space to do the comic end. Which my memory is that every time that kind of thing happened, it came as a surprise after we'd already worked on the script or figured out what we were going to do, and then we had to adjust uh, what we were doing in order to deal with the new requirement for the clip out coupon.
Right. So now earlier you were saying that one of the challenges you had were the rules of things that you could not show that are pretty central to what happens in a D&D game, like say violence of any kind. What?
Combat.
Yeah. So
Right. And
what went
go
on there?
ahead. So this is a perfect time to talk about this because that had been maybe a rule from the start, but they hadn't really told it to us. And so we hadn't, it didn't seem to, there, yeah, the first one didn't really have super explicit violence. It had magic spells, and that was it seemed to work. And I think it was mostly by the fact that we were trying to incorporate the elements of a dungeon adventure in the second episode, and we the first strip had ended with green slime, so we didn't actually have a living foe to fight there. Thinking about it, I don't think anyone ever said to us, make sure you don't have any sword fights in this, right? Make sure that you don't do these things that the game is famous for, because I mean, this was early days of D&D, and kill the monsters and take their treasure. That was how you got experience points,
Right.
right? So somewhere in the production of that second comic that we did, the third in the series, we got a call, probably from Gail and Dagmar, who again are really nice women, and again I remain friends with them to this day. And one of life's weird coincidences, Gail was actually the best friend in high school of my wife's current best friend when my wife's friend was growing up. So I ran into her a barbecue over the 4th of July, and it was like, yeah, and I was like, yeah, I used to work at TSR, and this woman sitting across from me was like, yeah, I used to work at TSR too. And I'm like, oh my god, Gail. Anyway, they were really nice. So they probably said this as nicely as they could, and it may have come up after we had worked out the story and we're going to have some fighting in it with these goblins, right? There was going to be
Mm-hmm.
this battle in the next episode. And at that point the word came down that this was great, but we could not have actual combat. We couldn't have fighting. We couldn't have fighting. We couldn't have, our characters killing uh, goblins or anything else for that matter, really. The green slime probably didn't count. Um, And we're like, well, okay, so they'll battle the goblin somehow, and they'll win their treasure, and they'll go off to the next adventure. Um, and they were like, well, no, you can't actually steal the treasure from creatures that you defeat either. You can't take the treasure because that's looting, and looting is bad. And this is again, 1982 is the point at which we're not in full blown satanic panic yet, but we're starting to get the first echoes of backlash against the game as the game's becoming more popular. So we can't have take treasure, we can't fight things, and Jeff D being a in or out, black or white kind of guy back then, and even somewhat today, which is nothing against him. It's like strong principles are great. Jeff is like, well, this is nothing like the game at all. I'm out. To which Bill and I are like, what? What do you mean you're out? My memory is that he said he'd help with the lettering, but he wasn't going to otherwise participate in the comic anymore, which looked really bad in some sense for us continuing to do it. But happily, remember when I said Bill could charm the birds out of the trees? Did I say
Yes.
it that way?
Yeah, you
Bill
said
could
yeah.
charm Bill could charm the birds out of the trees when he wants to. I've got a pretty strong gift of gab. Uh, Bill has all of that plus his own native charm. So we convinced the advertising department that this was no problem. We could Bill and I could carry on and do it on our own within the strictures that they wanted to do. The funny thing is, Jeff worked on this just for that like month that it took us to do that first one. And I don't remember how long it was. We weren't doing this on staff, by the way. We were doing it as freelancers.
I was about to ask,
And
wasn't your day assignment, right?
right, yeah, no, we were doing this all on our own time. And this was at one of those points in TSR where that wasn't a problem. I know that later on it was like everything you do all the time, the company owns, we don't have to give you anything extra for it, blah 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 blah. This was not that time. This was the boom times of D&D when everyone was having a good time and we were all, we were all friends and we weren't worried about those kind of things. So we were doing this on our own in our spare time. At some point, probably around here, Bill and Jeff also left the company. But since
Mm-hmm.
we're doing this freelance, that wasn't a big problem. And this is 42 years ago now. So there's no way I think any of us are going to be able to figure out exactly how that timeline coincides with them leaving TSR and that kind of stuff. But it was in the same kind of time frame. I had probably moved down to the art department sometime around this also. Um, but it, as far as Gail and Dagmar were concerned, we were doing great, and the campaign was a success because people were, sending those coupons in like nobody's business, and the mail order catalog and stuff. Those guys were super pleased with all of this. Uh, so happily, it wasn't actually a problem for us to keep doing this. And not only that, since we've done well on this, there was one more to do that we could do now, and then we are going to do one more because they'd done this, as we found out, probably about then. They'd done an ad buy that included 4 insertions into Marvel Comics, with the last one, as it turns out, being a back cover, which is, I'm sure, made all of this super expensive at the time.
Yeah.
So that was great. So Bill and I tackled the new assignment, which was the old assignment, but with a little less violence. uh, and I don't think it really slowed us down at all. You can see though that there's a big difference in terms of Bill has said this in he's got uh, uh, an interview online on YouTube, and I don't remember what it's called in the regular interview series that he does, that where he talks about this too. If you look at the quality of the inking and the coloring, especially between episodes 2 and 3, where it goes from Jeff and Bill together. Bill does, this is so long ago. Jeff doesn't remember any of this, right?
Right.
And Bill and I don't always remember exactly the same, and there's stuff he doesn't quite remember either. So, some of it's lost to the mist of time. But I think between me and him, that we're generally in agreement about all this. But he says that you can see the difference in quality in terms of the layout and composition and pretty much everything, and especially the coloring between episodes 2 and episodes 3 of this story. And by that time, we knew we were doing a 4 episode arc. And probably we knew that a little bit earlier, because it really seems to me that I'm, as a, the storyteller here, I'm setting up the story to climax with this. We've got the dungeon, we've got to have a dragon, right? And that's how we get greetings, mortal worm,
Right.
at the end of the last thing. So, we know where we're going. So Bill and I just said, "Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it. We'll continue to do it, and let's have at it." And we kept going, and learning on the job, with me learning more about scripting comics, and Bill learning more about drawing comics. And again, there probably were times, because I'm, from the 1970s school of Marvel writing at the time. There were probably times where he I would script something, and then he would suggest a condensation. And later, when he was not living in Lake Geneva, sometimes it would be a phone call that said, where Bill was like, "Hey, I had to condense this script. It now says this." Um, but because we're all of us are kind of, I don't know, independent rogues at TSR anyway. between right around this time, Bill does a very funny sketch parody comic of that same episode, the same episode with the goblins, where where it starts with Siren appearing and saying, "No questions, damn it!" and the goblins attacking her, and then Grimslade saying, "Leave that slut alone," and then uh, it gets more obscene as it goes. But the the panel where they're saying a sleep spell will take care of them, there's roughed in form of a goblin with ribs sticking out and blood spurting from him,
Yeah.
where Grimslade says, "Don't worry, they're only sleeping." So yeah, we did the job, but at the same time, there was a little bit of chafing against that new bridles that we had on us. But it was good work and it was fun comics work. So we
So,
kept at it. We weren't. I guess
so
we weren't as maybe as high minded as Jeff in some ways.
so you say that the it was this first storyline, the whole thing was four stories, and that was going to be it, but it wasn't it. It was
Yeah. Yes, it wasn't it. It was, in fact, the response to this was so good that when we reached the end of this story, which you're now doing a new drawing of, we got a call or a message from Gail and Dagmar. They were like, "Hey, well, this has been great. We're doing really well with it. People are sending in a lot of those crazy coupons. So we're going to do 6 more." And you know, freelance work, 6 more, awesome. That is fabulous. You're paying me $25 a page or whatever it was, and it may not even have been that
yeah.
much. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was freelance work, and we were happy to take it. And so Bill and I started thinking about it. And we had discussions about what we should do next. And I don't remember if this was in person or over the phone, but very quickly we came up with the idea that we'd done a dungeon adventure, and the other thing that you did in D&D at the time, where we came from anyway, which was very different places, but the other big thing was wilderness adventures.
Right.
So we'd done a dungeon adventure. Now we would do a wilderness adventure that would include, random encounters in the woods and all sorts of stuff that might happen to you in the wilderness, and then end up at a final destination, in a castle was the thought, because that was one of the big things about wilderness adventures is you always ended up at the castle of some lord or evil wizard or something like that. And so we had the general idea of where we were going for the second adventure, and then started planning and plotting it out. And again, since I was scripting, I came up with the idea, as I remember, of that we would introduce the mentor of our characters, who was another wizard, an older wizard,
Right.
and we would get a little flashback that way. We'd start in the tavern, because all D&D adventures either start or end in a tavern, right? And I think the last thing we'd said was "see you all in the tavern," right, in the previous episode. And so we worked up
Yep.
this little backstory. I put their mentor Grindel, in peril, and then they got a quest, which is another D&D thing. Here you're on a quest to go out into the wilderness and save your mentor, which is very D&D, and also, a favorite of fantasy stories and kung fu movies everywhere, right?
Yeah. All right. So, rather than continue going through the storyline, people can find this place online. Let's kind of look at it, kind of take a step back and look at the. Well, no, let's start with how it was doing so great. Why did it end?
Now that's one of these amazing stories that, if you've ever read any of the histories of TSR, you won't, you probably won't be really surprised to find out that there was a change in management fiat and philosophy So we had, as I said, we had 6 issues that we were going to do, 6 episodes, and we plotted out a story for those 6 episodes. And again, the strictures got a little more strict as we went. Some of the things, for instance, we weren't supposed to call Siren a cleric anymore, and we really weren't supposed to call things spells because people were worried about magic and magic being real, which it's not, and TSR being involved with dark powers, which it wasn't, isn't, and it never was. Um, and so we had that, and we couldn't say Siren was a cleric because, of course, some people think there's only one kind of clerics, and they're clerics of the one true God, and all that kind of stuff. Even though, how many Christian denominations are there anyway, and how different are they from each other? Um, so that came in, and then right at the end, again, we got the sudden explosion of that clip portion of the ad where it went from a quarter of the page to I think a third of the page easily in that last one. Bill and I were working remotely at this time. I don't remember if he was in Michigan or Texas or New York or where he was. Uh, so every time something like that came up, he would call me and he would say, "Hey, we got to change this because," or he would. In the case of the last one, he was like, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I had to cut out 2 panels of that. I hope you don't mind." And I was like, "It is what it is, Bill." Um, so that happened right at the end. But being creative people, Bill and I were willing to work around the strictures and keep doing this. And then we got a call. It was probably a call at that point where the ad Gail and Dagmar said, "Well, we've changed the kind of ads we're going to do, and so we're stopping now." And my memory is like saying, "Well, could we have one episode to wrap it up?" And they were like, "No, it's too expensive." And the executives at TSR have changed what they want to do with these ads, and we're done. And Bill talks about this a little in his talk. Basically, there was a thing in TSR where they were never, if you came up from inside the company, they were never as likely to listen to you as they were to outside experts because
Yeah.
some of the people at the top of the company, well, none of the people at the top of the company were really in any way qualified to run the multi-million dollar business that TSR had become. So they were always looking to send their own people to probably insanely expensive seminars to learn how to do the jobs that they'd already been given
Right.
but didn't know how to do. And apparently one of these seminars, I believe that's how it came about. It could have been an article, it could have been any number of other things, had been a how to best do advertising.
Yeah.
And so they had gleaned from this course or article or whatever it was that one of the principles of advertising was that your ad needed to stand out from the material surrounding it. And in this case, that meant only an idiot would advertise in a comic book by doing another comic book page. Never mind that Hostess was doing the same thing around the same
Right.
time, right? And had been for years. And obviously, it was a very successful tactic. But literally, it was literally one of these overnight decisions that they're like, nope, we're best advertising practices are not to do it the way we've been doing it, not the way to do it how we've been so doing it so successfully. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to having ads of people sitting around the table or showing the box cover of the game, and that's it.
Right.
And literally overnight, the whole thing went away. You know, I'm sure that Gail and Dagmar would have been happy to give us another episode to wrap it all up, but that didn't happen because that was not how it was done. It didn't matter how it was being done was hugely successful. Uh, and thus the ads ended literally overnight, much to my surprise and much to Bill's surprise, in both Marvel Comics and Epic as well.
Man.
And that's why, so it looks like we're going somewhere. We planned to go somewhere. I don't know exactly what Bill's plans were for Epic, but I'm sure he had some kind of. It was probably two more issues that he
Oh
was
yeah,
thinking he'd get somewhere and wrap
kind
it
of
up.
like yours. Bill's ends. They're definitely on a quest. They're headed somewhere in particular, and they run into the cliffhanger. They run into the storm giant, and then we never find out what happens.
And boom, that's the end of it.
Yep.
Yeah, and that it. Sadly, don't blame me. Don't blame Bill.
Oh no.
This was not what we intended. I don't think anyone ever did. It just became one of those long-standing, ongoing mysteries for people. It's like, why did this happen? And
Yeah,
it happened just
like you were saying, that's what I was talking about. I run into this in every company I've worked at. They don't believe they have the people they've hired who do the thing the better than anyone else and are
right.
the experts in the field, and they won't listen to them. They listen to an outside expert who comes in and doesn't really understand, but will charge them tens of thousands of dollars. So the advice must be good.
Right. Yeah. It's like the revamp of the TSR logo would happen at kind of the same time, and it went from being the kind of charming game wizard face of the moon like Procter and Gamble that Darlene had done to being the very blocky looking dungeon like thing that I, as a mapper, could have designed for them in an afternoon, or any of the rest of us in the art department could have designed, and it would have been essentially free to them. But that is that the prophet is never honored in his own land, or whatever that saying is. That it was totally true at TSR, uh, almost 100% at the time. Occasionally, if they'd hired you in as an expert at TSR and you worked out, which a lot of the people that they hired in did not work out to my memory, but there were people like Larry Elmore and Mike Gray, Larry being an artist and Mike Gray being a game designer, who ended up, they brought them in from other places. So they respected them more than those of us who had been in the company and kind of worked our way up through the ranks. And, despite all the successes that we'd had with the company without our MBAs. In fact, the reason that I left the editorial department was on one of these seminars. They decided that everyone that was in the editorial department needed to have a a degree in a related field
Yeah.
in order to work in the department. And I had left college to work at TSR. So I didn't have, and I still don't have any degree at all. And I'd left college to work for them. And suddenly they were saying, well, if you don't have a degree, you can't work for us. And this was another one of those kind of weird, hey, we just took this course that's telling us how to better do what we're already doing. And, it was all management problems. Sadly, TSR had, from pretty much the time I got there until the end of them as a company, they had management problems, and it was almost always this kind of strange fiats and overreach and stuff. It was a great place to work. The people that work there are, they're like my family still, from the people in the creative division.
Right.
The executive division, not so much. Some were some like Gary were, you know eventually very good friends of mine that were, you didn't want to hear from them inside the company because you never knew what they were going to do. And that was, some of that was reflective of all the really awful politicking that was going on in the management sections of TSR. And probably this was again one of those little power plays where Dave and Gary were on one side and other members of the company were on the other side, and
Right.
and in order to be more quote unquote professional, they decided to do things in a way we'd never done them before, that was not a proven way to do it, that required people outside of the house. And that's how we got Morley the Wizard, for instance, who was roundly hated by I think I can say, by everyone in the art department. Hated so
So
much
like
that Jim Holloway.
Morley the Wizard lives in uh, the same realm with Regdar from third edition, who got
Yeah, see,
added
I
in
don't
by
remember that character.
the advertising and business people, and
Well, there you go.
yeah,
Why did they have to learn that same lesson, 10 years later? I don't understand,
because
man.
they have to.
Um,
So
right, yeah, I mean, you should have seen the look on Larry's face when we were given Morley, and he was like, and he was told, "Okay, this painting you have to do for Fantasy Forest has to have this character in it." And Larry's like, "Can I redesign it?" And they're like, "No, the whole point is that this is what he looks like and will for now and forever." Larry did a little tweak so Morley looks a little better, but Jim Holloway did too. Jim Holloway, the fastest pen in the West, did two really scathing Morley satires. Just because he could. The one of which that is not obscene has Morley and his hat has fallen off, and he has a pointed head underneath the pointed hat, and he's got a child over his knee, and he's stabbing him with that wand that always looked like a dagger. To those of us, if you look at Morley's wand, it looks like a dagger, and so that was we didn't like Morley. And again, no
so
reflection on Ray or anyone else that worked on Morley. It was a management versus talent problem.
yeah. All right, so I'm gonna leave my drawing here and finish it offline, and not end our conversation here, but kind of move into the final segment. Hey, Jamie Chambers has showed up. Sorry, Jamie, I did not see you pop in here. Thanks for
Oh yeah, and I haven't even been looking at the. I'm sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat at all. I
That's all right.
apologize.
That's all right. So one of the interesting things I find about the comic is first of all, one of the sad things is how much it's been forgotten. Right, the people that remember it and love it. But I kept over the years the PDF that I was showing before is one I prepared while I was working at Wizards because I was suggesting that we do something like it and no one knew what I was talking about. So
Oh my God.
I kept it at my desk, and every 2 years I would need to bring it out for a meeting with someone who didn't remember the last time I brought it out or the new people who had come in. It's been sadly
Wow.
forgotten there many times. I'm sure
In in
there are
some
people
circles,
there that do know it, but not the right people. Um,
right?
and then the fan base, right? Unless you happen across one of a podcast like this or some other blog post that'll mention it, I think these things should be remembered up there with the best of the adventures, the classic adventures, the bits
Thank
of
you.
D&D lore that are part and parcel of the game's memory here in this 50 years, which is why I decided to do
Right.
this is my homage today.
Yeah,
Um,
and thank you for that.
oh, thank you for
Well,
putting
you're
this
very
thing
welcome.
together. You and Bill and Jeff, let's say, is hugely important to me. But one of the things I remember talking to you, you're the first person that told me this that there among the people that do know it, there are some interesting rumors or uh, uh, folk knowledge like about the
Fan
ending.
theories.
Yeah, fan theories.
Yes. Yeah,
What are
there
some
was
of those that you can remember?
I discovered just a couple of years ago, just by random occurrence on the internet. I don't remember someone posted about it in a Facebook thing or something, that there had been a kind of an active fan discussion about these comics and who had done them and what was going on with them and what the circumstances were. And Bill's art style is really easy to spot,
Yeah,
right? For those of us that are into comic books, for those of us that have that kind of visual memory, it's kind of the same thing that might make you good at art history and say, oh, yeah, that's a Monet or that's a Degas or whatever. Bill is very easy to spot in
right.
terms of art. So people knew Bill had done it. but they knew no other history about it at all. So there was a lot of speculation. There was a lot of speculation about what world it was set in. Was it set in this world? Why did it not quite follow the rules of D&D and all that kind of stuff? But my favorite thing about this whole thing was the fan theories about the ending of it. And I don't remember what some of them were, but the one I loved was the fan theory that it was a time loop,
Right.
and that the end of the last episode that Bill and I did, they're teleporting into the castle, and that loops all the way back around to the original
Right.
Raycione Studio episode, and it just continues.
So the
And
first panel of the very first one says, Valerius the fighter, Grimm's blade the magic user, and Indel the elf find a secret door in the ruins of Xenopus Castle, and that's as much of an intro as we get. And then
right,
I'm gonna skim quick. Sorry if I'm making anyone sick while I do this. The very final panel is an ancient castle. Could the end of the quest lie here? And then we never see anything else. Please continue.
yeah. So that was the fan theory, and I love that theory. I think that is just the coolest theory in the world, but it's totally not true. It just happened to end up that way because the last two episodes of this were planned to be battles or non-battles within the castle, and it just is an interesting sidelight. And I hope something more will come of this that we can show people. There, Jeff D had been doing redrawings of his work at TSR as
Yes, he's been
part
doing
of his Patreon.
Kickstarter and Patreon. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And he had started just doing his own stuff, but over time, people had convinced him he should do other well known pieces of TSR art and
Sounds like
redo
a
them
good
in
idea
his
to
own
me.
style. Yeah, no, it's like kind of a brilliant thing to do, you know. I mean, I totally get it. It's a great idea. And he's one of the people he was working on with is a private collector who likes to have reproductions of comic covers done by their original artists. So he
Right.
has this guy whose name I won't mention in case he wants to be anonymous, has like had Jim Starlin redraw covers of Warlock for him, right? Because he's he's got the wherewithal to do that, and if you can, well, why not, you know? And so Jeff was doing some stuff for this guy, and I'm not sure if it was, I'd have to, go back and maybe check notes. I'm not sure if it was Jeff who suggested this or the patron who suggested this, said, well, what about you redrawing those D&D comics that, you worked on Once Upon a Time way back when. And it may have been that Jeff came up with the idea and called me, said, hey, this guy may be interested in having this done. You wrote those original ones. Would you be willing to to do it? Would you be willing to start it up and redo the series? And we wouldn't have to have, it doesn't have to be an exact reproduction. We wouldn't have to have the ads in. So potentially we can have at least one more panel
Ooh.
in any of these things that we do. And I was like, well, that sounds just awesome. I haven't worked with you for a long I hadn't worked with Jeff for a long time. Um, but it also gave me a chance to go back and maybe tweak a few things that I had, learned as a writer on my own stuff, and just gussy up the redo of the first episode that had been done by Sione Studios. So Jeff and I have been working on this and have actually finished the entire series as it was printed. Then went back and did a splash page as if it was an actual comic book in the style of one of those old Avengers, all the characters are here waving their hands kind of splash pages, and actually finished the last two episodes of the entire story.
Wow.
So we actually now, for the first time, have the entire arc of the both stories that ran in the comic books,
Wow.
plus a splash page.
I want
And
it.
the question is, yeah, the question is, it's fine to hang on this guy's wall.
Right.
but can we figure out the legalities of actually sharing that? And in
So
fact, we've even discussed doing another story beyond that too, and gotten to the point where, uh, well, something came up in the patron's life, so we've had to put it all on hold. But the first two series are finally now complete. I think I couldn't quickly find my notes for the last two episodes that were supposed to be, but it's one of those things. I don't know. It's like if you know a song and you know and you recreate the first three verses in the fourth verse is going to be there when you get there. And so I'm pretty
right.
sure that what happens in those last two episodes is very, very close to what would have happened had we been able to continue it. And part of that is because I'd set up stuff for the last episode and the first episodes.
I I I I, I can't tell you how much I want to see that.
I know. I know. I
Uh,
believe you.
I get the legal. I mean, the legal issues are huge, right? This is clearly D&D. Belongs to D&D TSR, so it now belongs to Wizards, so it now belongs to Hasbro.
Right.
There's no question about that.
Right. And Hasbro is, I mean, they send me royalties occasionally, so I'm not going to say terrible things about
Here's
them, but it becomes legally so much more difficult. But go ahead, Stan.
here's my thought. Make make a publication that's about something else, and this is covered by it. And so you there almost always, and Hasbro's Wizards and Hasbro has been very good about this, as near as I can tell, giving people permission to reprint their own stuff, in the artists permission to reprint their own work, as long as it's not all Wizards and it's not reprinting.
Right.
It's like it's the art of the
The art of Dungeons and
yeah,
Dragons comics.
yeah. And
With
so you talk
I
about
I welcome your advice off
right.
mic
I mean, I don't
to
know.
try
I'm
to
not a
figure this
lawyer.
out. We've
Not a
thought
lawyer.
about that.
But that's the
Well, they
avenue I would pursue.
and I've thought of the idea of I have, like, I don't know, it's like a 10,000 word essay explaining all this
Yeah,
stuff and more that you and I just went through. And I thought that, yeah, if we did it as an essay, maybe we could. The patron was of the impression that he wanted a whole comic book's worth of comics,
right.
which would involve another chunk of comics. But as you said, that then becomes problematic because then it's all Watsy's stuff.
If you're
And how
using
do we
those
go from
characters, yeah,
there?
you can't use those characters.
Unless they're covered under the OGL, which I'm not sure they are.
Probably not. I say no one has remembered it enough to have put that under the OGL. The OGL is very specific about what things that do get released. So if they didn't think
Yeah.
to release it, it won't be in there.
Okay. All right. Yeah. See, I don't have the
Oh,
expertise on that to know,
oh,
and even that would be another nightmare. But
yeah.
the material is out there. It exists. The hope is that we will be able to figure out somehow to release this. And if people that are watching this know the person at Hasbro, Watsy, whatever, that I should talk to, that would then say, yeah, well, you can do this under these circumstances, or you can do this if you
So
pay X amount of money or whatever.
so
That'd
I
be cool.
pointedly don't want to get into assessing TSR or Wizards in this series. I want to talk about D and
No,
D, but no, and
right.
I'd say not for you, because I'm about to break that rule a little bit. Last fall, when Wizards had, I could have told you who the people to talk to were, and I knew who was still there. I still bump into them occasionally in places, but um, when they did their layoffs last year, they
Hmm.
it's hard to say, they inadvertently got rid of the entire department of people who do that, because
I I I know what that feeling is
it,
like because
so
I was working for Marvel Comics, writing Disney comics for Marvel before Marvel was part of Disney.
right.
And I woke up one morning while I was working, and I'd done something like probably 20 scripts for them, of which they'd published like 6 or something like that at that point. And I woke up one morning uh, during the 90s, I think it was, maybe it was the early 2000s, and they had literally fired everyone I knew at the company. Not deliberately, not to get
Right.
me. It was just like everyone that I was connected with and had had
Yeah.
ways to talk to and then find out who I needed to go to. They were just suddenly all gone. So that sounds like
Yeah.
that's exactly
I
what's just happened to you.
from having talked to people that I do know there, from what I can tell, and this is me putting pieces together. I may be wrong about this. It seems like different parts of that layoff were handled by different groups, and each of the groups thought, well, the other side, we're going to get rid of all the people on this side. Like the the layoffs went into people that got eliminated and people who took early retirement.
Right.
From what I can figure out, the people who were figuring out who got early retirement and the people who were deciding who to let go by just eliminating the positions were different people who weren't interacting with each other. And so the people that were eliminating positions says, well, we can get rid of all those positions because we've got these higher up people and they're who we want anyway. And the people who were saying, they said, oh, well, these people have been around a long time. We should offer them early retirement. And they all took it. And so it turns out
Right.
the entire group that worked on that kind of thing, poof, gone. In,
Right.
in
Yeah.
I think just like that, it was done.
Right. No. No. That was like when Bertelsmann or whoever it was grabbed Simon and Schuster, and I was working on the Boy Detective series. I was writing almost half of them every month, every year,
Yeah.
right? And suddenly they got bought up, decided they needed to cut salaries. Who was the highest paid person in this particular area? It was the woman who had run the Boy Detectives and the Girl Detective for God even knows how many years, who knew all the stuff about all the series and had been doing it for so long. And suddenly she wasn't there. And her. And she'd let me know about this. And so I ended up dealing with her assistant who had not been there that long. And the assistant would come to me and say, can we you have this happening in the story, can we do this? And I would
Uh,
say, yes, yes, we've done this many times before, you don't have to worry. So suddenly I had become the
the
keeper
expert.
of what was possible in the yeah, the expert in this era. And then that gal went too, and then it went all to hell in a handbasket at that point. So you know, corporations, man.
Yeah. All right.
You never
So,
can tell.
God, we've been going an hour and a half, and I don't want to impinge upon your time uh, too greatly because I do still want to have you back again later on in the series, like we were talking about previously. Um,
Yeah, that'd be great.
but
Oh, I should mention that there was an attempt by me and Bill and Jeff at various points to get TSR to actually do comics.
yeah,
And then at the time Dragonlance was being made, Tim Truman and Tim was on staff and I was still on staff, and I actually pitched a Dragonlance comic to go with the launch of Dragonlance. So if you're looking for obscure TSR comics, there's 2 pages of Dragonlance from
ooh,
the very start of Dragonlance that you can find on my website. That I have again
which
because it was one of
is
my babies. Uh,
scsullivan.com.
yes, uh, you can go there and find a little story on that. But that was TSR never thought comics were. They had
Yeah,
all these comics talents. Tim Truman brought Steve Bissett and John Totleben and Ron Randall and Jan Duursema and Tom Mandrake and probably some other people that I'm forgetting in to do sketches for the silly toy figures that had such a fiasco kind of happening. They did beautiful, beautiful work. And so we had all these people that became comics, if not legends, well-known figures in the
yeah.
comics industry at TSR at various times. Well, and I suppose I could include myself in that, and we just never could get them to do comics, whether it was based on the ads or whether it was based on Dragonlance or anything. So I
Well,
mean, eventually they did, but they took it to DC,
they
and our
and then they
our good
brought it
friend Jeff
back
Grubb
because
got
they
to do
thought
it.
they could do it better themselves, and it turns out they couldn't. I
Well,
I
because they'd
it's
gotten rid
been
of
a
all the people who knew how to do it.
well. I tell you,
In
opinion
my
is
opinion.
my opinion is that the management always thinks that it's super easy to do this thing, and they can get the right people to create the material, but they don't get the right people to sell it, or they don't want to go through the usual chains. They think, well, you can just, if we make it, if we print it, they will come. And that's not
Right.
what happens. And then it turns out that it's not the cash cow they thought it was. And then they decide, well, it turns out comics stink, rather than learning the lesson of, oh, well, we've got to do it the way, there's a way that it gets done. And so
Right. Well, and that's exactly what
wipe the
happened with the
board.
computer games.
A few years later, they say, no, no, comics are good. We should do that. And the cycle repeats itself. And it's repeated itself with computer
Ironically,
games.
in the early days, I think what was keeping them from doing it was the actual production process and distribution of comics, because this was way before the direct distribution system.
Yeah.
So it was, in some sense, harder to do back then. But they were a publishing company. They had stuff with Random House. They had, you know, they could have done it if they'd
Well, I
had.
mean,
If
they did the Dragonlance graphic novels early on. There's four-part telling of the original of uh, um, the main Dragonlance cycle. Uh,
was that
what
done in
as they
house
exist,
though, or was that part
and
of the DC?
Yates did a lot of the art for that. It's gorgeous stuff.
There you go.
It got
He
done.
was another one. I forgot about Yates.
It got published, but because they just assumed that if we just, we sell it, we sell all our other stuff. We'll put it out the same way. That that's not good enough. So it didn't sell well. So they decided the lesson was that it wouldn't sell, not that they had made a mistake.
Right. No. Well, you can never. The management never made any mistakes at TSR. That's a well-known fact.
All right, I'm gonna stop that. It's not what the show's about. No,
No. No.
good,
No. No.
happy
No more
vibes,
Schadenfreude.
happy vibes.
But the point is that we had a great time doing this
Yeah.
series, and I've been happy to pick it up again, and I'd be happy to do it more of it, even today. With older, wiser, all that kind of stuff, because it was
So,
fun. It was
uh,
great.
if, if folks do want to learn more about it, Steve does have information about it, and his, I think some of your retouched up pages are online.
I have the I have some of it on a video I did for GaryCon last year when I was virtual. I did a virtual lecture on this, but I do have a multi-part series that when I can ever find the time to sit down and edit it up and do the final fact checks and that kind of stuff, it will appear on my website sdsullivan.com.
sdsullivan.com. Check it out. There's all kinds of great stuff there. Steve, hang on. I'm going to take you off and do a wrap up, and then you and I can wrap up our
It's
show.
been awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very
I'll finally look at the chat and see what we missed.
much. All right. So thank you, Steve Sullivan, for coming by again and giving us all that wonderful behind the scenes story about the D&D comic ads that ran in Marvel Comics. I'm going to finish up my homage offline. It will be available next day or two. And once it's available, of course, it will be shown to. Where's my thing? This is my thing. If you are a subscriber to the newsletter for this show, 50 Years in the Dungeon, that's 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com. It's a free newsletter. You join it, you will get the art as soon as it's finished. And if you are a paid subscriber, you'll get other things like uh, a process video of the art and how it all came together. Even the free subscribers get access to art prints and other merch which are not available any other place. Paid subscribers get discounts on those. So I'm not pushing anyone towards paid, though I'm pushing you towards paid. But free is great. Please join the free newsletter 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com. Um, and yeah, you'll see lots of cool stuff. Um, I the feeling there was something else I wanted to say. I'm just too busy thinking about that D&D comic now. So I'm gonna wrap up here. I will be back next week, next Wednesday, with another episode and another guest. And come on back, see who it is and what we'll be talking about. But thank you again to Steve Sullivan, sdsullivan.com. Go visit him there. Until then, I'll catch you next time. Bye.